Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marked. We're on chapters 13 and 14. So obviously, you know the drill. We are going to just jump right in. Chapter 13, Gwen. After leaving Olivelle, Gwen and Emil rode until evening and then set up camp on the side of the road. The landscape was a long stretch of flatlands comprised of tall golden grass that swayed in the breeze. They ate a small meal from the supplies Kirith had given them, and Emil offered to take the first watch. Gwen laid on the ground and stared up at the night sky, counting the stars and trying not to think about her earlier revelation. Emil had dropped a vial that contained what appeared to be the same poison that had infected the Thestrit River. Gwen was certain it was the same liquid, but she wanted to be able to confirm it. The problem was she didn't know how, and even if she did, what could she do about it? The most troubling thing to Gwen was why. Why had Emil done such a horrid thing? It didn't make sense unless Kirith had snubbed her in some way, and even then, Gwen didn't believe that Emil would go to such lengths. At least, she didn't want to believe the woman would do something like that. Yet she had to consider how she barely knew the woman. If Eridor trusts her, then so should I, Gwen thought. She struggled with her feelings until sleep eventually claimed her. When Emil woke her up for her turn at watch, Gwen felt like she'd only just fallen asleep. She rose and tended the fire until sunrise, when she allowed the embers to go cold. They ate breakfast, mostly cheese and grapes, and then rode most of the day. They stopped only a handful of times, and only long enough to relieve themselves or to allow the horses to drink. They kept a steady pace, with Emil determined to reach the capital city of Steepcross, called Arbington, before nightfall. When the city was finally within sight, the sun was in the middle of the sky. Gwen was surprised at how quickly they'd arrived. Large braziers stood outside the gates to light the way for straggling travelers, but they were empty now. The guards at the gates were dozing at their posts, and Gwen and Emil entered the city without issue. The great library requires an appointment, so we'll bide our time at the Crow's Foot, Emil said, guiding her horse along the main cobbled street. I've stayed there before. It'll do for our needs. What about our horses? Will the Crow's Foot board them? No, we'll have to leave them somewhere else, but I know just the place. Emil led the way through the city, keeping to the main streets until they reached the other end of the city where another gate, this one smaller than the main one, led out into the countryside. The area was quiet, but a pungent smell lingered in the air. Most of the stables are located in this part of the city, Emil said. It keeps the stench and mess in one place. It's a good idea, Gwen replied. Having to smell this, she waved her hand, while eating or drinking in a tavern would be less than ideal. Exactly. It also provides an easy exit if we have to leave quickly. Gwen wondered why they might have to make a hasty retreat, but she said nothing. Every little thing Emil said came across as suspect now that she'd found the vial. They left the horses with the young boy and paid the boarding fee to an older man whom Gwen assumed was the boy's father. Emil and Gwen backtracked to the center of the city, and entered a large building with a sign that hung up from the roof that read Crow's Foot. Gwen felt more at home than she had in weeks. The inn was crowded, and a troupe of musicians was playing a lively tune. The atmosphere was one of camaraderie, and the ale was flowing. Gwen found it all refreshing and allowed herself to forget her problems for a while. She was so enwrapped with the music that she barely heard Emil say she was going to get them an appointment at the great library. Gwen was pleasantly surprised when she spotted a familiar face. A young man was moving through the crowded room, making his way to where the musicians were. Brown hair, clean-shaven, handsome. It was definitely him. He waited for the troupe to finish their final song, then took their place and struck up a tune with his lute. Gwen watched him intently, remembering his performance from the last time she saw him. That had been the night that started it all, and had put Gwen on the path to joining the rebellion. The bard's fingers strummed over the strings, playing with practiced ease. He was just as good as she remembered. She smiled, happy to know that he'd escaped her father's inn and that nothing ill had befallen him. Other memories, darker ones, hovered at the edge of her mind, but she kept them at bay by focusing on the music. Emil eventually returned and sat across from Gwen. The bard played several more songs before another musician took over, and then Gwen turned her attention to Emil. How did it go? As well as can be expected for a last-minute request, Emil replied, but one of the librarians owes me a favor, so I was able to get us in. If you're done drooling over the handsome bard, we can go now. I wasn't, Gwen sputtered. Whatever, Emil interrupted. Are you ready to go? We've got a limited amount of time inside. Gwen rose from her seat. I'm ready. Despite her tone of confidence, she had a lot of trepidation about learning her true name. Tobias had once mentioned that he thought she was the lost princess of Eisenthal, but she doubted that was true. And while Boris had admitted that he wasn't her real father, she didn't think that meant Tobias had been right. They left the Crow's Foot and headed west toward a stone structure that Gwen had mistakenly assumed was a castle. It was plain and unadorned. A moat surrounded the building, and the two women had to cross a bridge to reach the grounds of the great library. The entrance wasn't guarded, but there were two great wooden doors that Gwen thought would be impossible to move without a small army. Emil knocked on one of the doors. A few moments passed, and then a small rectangular panel slid open and two eyes peered out. Yes? It was a woman's voice. Gwen thought she sounded old, perhaps someone of 60 or 70 years. We have an appointment, Emil answered. The eyes shifted from Emil to Gwen, then the panel slid shut and the door opened. Gwen had been right. The woman standing before them was in her later years. Her hair was long, gray, mingled with white. Her skin hung loosely on her face, and she wore a flowing blue robe trimmed in silver. Very well, she said, stepping aside. Speak your name and enter. Emil Cirillo. Emil stepped forward and crossed the threshold of the doorway. Gwen Wilmarth. Gwen stepped forward, hoping she didn't experience a wave of nausea like she had in Olivelle. To her surprise, an invisible barrier kept her from entering the library. Try it again, the old woman said, and use your true name this time. That is my name, Gwen replied. She cleared her throat and said her name again, louder this time. When she tried to enter the library, she was again held back by the invisible force. Emil was smirking, but the old woman frowned and eyed Gwen suspiciously. Deception will not gain you access into the library. I'm being truthful, Gwen protested. That is my name. No, it isn't, the woman said, else the ward would have let you in. I could vouch for her, Emil chimed in. She's a new mage, and it's possible her given name at birth isn't the one she has today. The old woman pondered over the information for a moment, then said, I've heard of stranger things happening before. She snapped her fingers and traced a symbol in the air with her hand. There was a sound of rushing air, and the woman motioned for Gwen to come inside. Gwen hesitantly stepped forward, and this time she wasn't hindered. The temperature in the library was noticeably colder than outside, and the smell of old parchment filled her nostrils. It seems you need to learn your true name, the woman said. Yes, that is why I've come here. I see. You could have said that to begin with. Follow me. The woman led her through the library, which appeared much larger from the inside than Gwen would have imagined. There were dozens of rooms down various hallways, and books were everywhere. I'm the head librarian, the woman said as they walked. My name is Marjorie, but you will call me librarian while you are here. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, Gwen said. I don't make the schedule, dear. I just adhere to it. Does the title head librarian mean you are over this entire place? Gwen asked. In a manner of speaking, Marjorie answered, though we have the Council of Librarians, and we all collectively make decisions by a majority vote. They are also all wizards like Eridor, Emil said. A common fact, Marjorie said. We consider ourselves a majocracy, if you will. A what? Gwen asked. Leadership run by wizards, Marjorie clarified. I thought wizards were rare. We are. This is probably the only place you'll ever see more than two wizards together outside the chamber of the altar. Though if the rumors are to be believed, King Torian has negated the treaty with the Order and his guards have barred access to the obsidian altar. It's true, Gwen said. I was there when they cleared the place out. Marjorie huffed under her breath, clearly upset by the news. She turned right down a hallway, stopped outside one of the doors. Reaching into her robes, she withdrew a brass key and slid it into the lock, turned it, and hid the key back within her robes. This room holds the Stone of Truth, Marjorie said. It is here where your true name shall be revealed. Marjorie pushed the door open and stepped inside, then closed it once Gwen and Emil had entered. Gwen expected something grandiose like a giant diamond or some other precious stone. Instead, there was a wooden table that held a palm-sized violet blue colored stone. It was smooth and polished. Gwen wasn't certain, but she thought the stone was giving off a faint light. I've never seen anything like that before, Gwen said softly. It's an azurite stone, Marjorie replied. It's imbued with ancient magic, spells older than the great library itself. Some say it was given to wizards by the goddess Solara. I can believe that, Gwen said. I wouldn't, Emil rolled her eyes. Solara is a myth. Have you ever seen Solara? Marjorie asked, looking at Emil. No. Have you ever been beyond the horizon, to the land of the godhood? Of course not, Emil replied. No one has. Then you should not dictate to another whether something is true or not. You shouldn't make absolute statements without absolute proof. This is a place of learning, and I will not tolerate half-truths. Fair enough, Emil said, but Gwen could tell that she didn't like being told what to do. Now then, you will hold the stone and connect your bunus to it, then speak your name. If you are lying, you will know. Set the stone down on this parchment. Marjorie held a fresh sheet from a stack to the center of the table. The truth will be revealed. Gwen swallowed the lump in her throat, then reached for the stone. She could feel the magic radiating from it. The energy pushed against her hand, though Gwen couldn't actually see anything. She lifted the stone and held it in her palm, then closed her eyes and envisioned the bunus rune in her mind. She felt it join the stone, the force of the connection almost causing her to drop it. Gwen Wilmarth, Gwen said. A shock ran up the length of her arm, and she cried out in surprise and pain. She opened her eyes and hurriedly set the stone onto the parchment, then massaged her arm with her left hand. The stone knows truth from deceit, Marjorie said. The paper hissed as the stone burned something into it, small tendrils of smoke rising into the air before quickly fading. Marjorie removed the stone and looked at the parchment. What does it say? Gwen asked eagerly. See for yourself. Marjorie held the parchment up. In a graceful flowing script was the name Quinn Lee. Quinn Lee? Gwen's face scrunched in displeasure. What kind of name is that? A rare name, Marjorie said, her expression curious. There's only one person I've ever known to have it. Who? Gwen asked. The lost princess of Eisenthal.
Chapter 14, Connell. Employing the benefits of his stealth rune, Connell lowered himself over the walls of Farrell's castle, pausing to get his bearing. Though late, he knew the Stag's Head would still be busy. Slipping through the streets, he stood outside the tavern and listened to the cacophony of patrons enjoying another ale. The door opened, and light spilled out along with two revelers who, upon seeing Connell, greeted him as a long-lost friend. Giving him an affable grin and a slap on the back, Connell brushed past them and into the tavern, rapidly scanning the room, surprised that Maldwick was still there. To his credit, the new leader of Oscon's company was sober and alert, immediately noting the new arrival. Connell weaved around the table to finally scoot a chair out next to Maldwick. Surprised to see you here, boss, Maldwick smiled. Surprised to see you still here, too, Connell returned the smile. We tracked four of them down, Maldwick said, getting to the reason to believe Connell was here. Good. I've got one more job for you. Whatever you need, boss, Maldwick confidently answered. Kill them. With a smile on Maldwick's lips remained, what was in his eyes vanished. We don't have people who are good at that. We rob and steal, but we don't kill. We have a few who are capable of cold-blooded murder, but I don't completely trust them. I understand, he nodded. That was one of the things I liked about the group. We were motivated by greed, not violence. I expect to use those skills in the future. As for now, tell me where they are, and I'll take care of business myself. No, boss, Maldwick quickly reconsidered. After all, he was in charge now. I'll take care of it. You sure? Like I said, we got a couple of folks who'd be more than willing to satisfy the bloodthirst. Leave it to me. Thanks. I'll see you in the morning. Morning came way too early for Connell. Making use of his stealth skills, he had prowled the streets until the early morning hours, knowing the only people out were burglars. Twice he had come upon thieves in the process of breaking into a house. Twice he had foiled the act by remaining in the shadows and gently coughing, scaring the intruders half to death and causing them to bolt. It had been great fun, but now he was paying the price for his late night escapade. Farrell is sending a cohort of his soldiers with us, Briac announced over breakfast, of roasted venison, fresh bread, cheese, and ale. Peering intently at him, he suppressed a smile. You look tired. Busy night, he said, uttering a drawn-out sigh. That's what you get for staying out late and partying, Briac chuckled at Connell's confused frown. He held his forearm out to show Connell that the runes were not glowing. Thank you. Connell immediately understood, silently thanking Maldwick for solving the problem. About time you got up, Trogarth greeted him, and as he and Gallagher entered into the dining room. He cut 2 slices of cheese, offering one to Gallaudet. Charles' cohort is about ready. How many are there? Connell stood, casting a wistful glance at the unfinished breakfast. Slow down, Torgreath advised with a grin. I said, about ready, which means another half an hour. Finish your lunch. Very funny, Connell smirked as he sat and ripped off a chunk of bread, slathering with warm butter. How many? Torgreath shrugged. Didn't bother to stop and count. Lord Farrell strode in, his usual arrogance forcibly suppressed. My Lord Connell, I'm sending a cohort of my best with you. I had my steward compose a missive to Gallaudet, urging him to action. With an overt flourish, he produced a sealed letter, placing it on the table. Thank you, Connell nodded, affecting as regal an air as possible. He blinked, thinking how stupid he must have sounded. Hoping no one noticed, he shifted a glance at Torgreath, who smirked, said he, too, thought it was rather pompous. Good old Torgreath. He's the one person I can trust to tell me when I'm getting too full of myself. I believe they're about ready, Farrell said, referring to his cohort. He was ready to be rid of his guests, and the sooner they were gone, the sooner he could stop pretending to fawn over this upstart. Once outside, Connell scanned the assembled troops, his eyes lighting on Maldwick, who was hustling over towards him. Morning, boss. He smiled, then leaned in so only Connell could hear. Took out most of them last night. One managed to escape, sorry. Nothing to apologize for, Connell reassured him, then placed a hand on Maldwick's shoulder. Just thankful I've got someone I can trust. He shot a meaningful glance at the assembled cohort. Good morning, my lord, the cohort commander called out as he approached. He was a wiry, muscular man adorned with breastplate and carried a feathered helmet in the crook of his arm. A short sword slapped at his thigh as he walked. He was clean shaven with his short, dark auburn hair. I'm Cadvin. Good morning, Captain, Connell amiably replied. You met Maldwick, chief of these marauders? I have not, my lord, he answered, giving Maldwick a reserved nod. I'm unfamiliar with your group. We like to keep it that way, Maldwick said with a polite smile. Are we ready, Captain? Connell interrupted before Cadvin could probe further. Yes, my lord. I want to get to Rexford as quickly as possible. Your cohort would take the lead. Set a good pace. As you wish, my lord. He saluted and jogged over to where his cohort held his mount. I want you close by, Connell whispered to Maldwick. Not that I don't trust the man. I just like having a more responsive force close by. You expecting trouble, boss? Not sure. Let's just say I have a feeling. Connell's jitters proved unfounded as the first day's travel proved quite uneventful. They camped outside the small town of Athgal, 2 hours' travel beyond the border of Farrell's domain. At first, the town's sole tavern was thrilled to have the increase in business. That lasted until just before the ale ran out, when 2 of Captain Cadfin's soldiers got into a shoving match that turned into a brawl, which ended up destroying most of the furniture inside the pub. Things didn't get any better when Connell and Briac were awoken in the middle of the night by the tavern owner, who demanded immediate payment. More than cross because he hadn't slept much the night before, Connell, along with Briac, confronted Cadfin, who seemed quite unaffected by the destruction. They're just letting off some steam, my lord. You know how it is. Letting off steam, Briac snapped. They destroyed the man's pub. Are you going to pay for the damages? I gave the man a chip in Lord Farrell's name. He'll get paid, Cadfin replied, wondering why they were so irritated. Paid? And how long would that take? Cadfin shrugged. Don't know. Not my problem anymore. Are you that stupid? Briac burst. How is he supposed to gain support if you're destroying everything in the process? He thrust a finger in the indignant pub owner who stood close by. What will he tell King Gallaudet when word gets out that the army marching through here destroyed his business? He'll get paid, probably a whole lot more than his pub's worth. The way I see it, he'd come out better in the long run. Really, Connell interjected. When do you think Lord Farrell will deliver good on your promise? Your soldiers caused the damage. Your soldiers can pay for the damage. Cadfin blinked in surprise. I don't think that's a good idea. If they spend their money now, they won't have enough when we get to Rexford. That's not my problem, Connell shot back, amazed at the man's stubborn stupidity. No one is going anywhere until you have given this man satisfaction. With all due respect, my lord, Captain retorted, his voice dripping contempt, I take my orders from Lord Farrell. His orders were to escort you to Rexford. What happens along the way with my soldiers is my concern, not yours. Connell noticed disrespectful use of my lord in addition to the man's insolence. His face hardening, he now had a penetrating gaze at Cadfin. You have no use to me. Take your ill-disciplined rabble and go back. I no longer have any need of you. Cadfin stiffened, standing to full height. I repeat, I take my orders from Lord Farrell. A sudden premonition fluttered within Connell. Controlling the urge to teach the man a lesson, he shook his head, then spun around and marched off. Startled, Briok chased after him. That's not the way to settle this. You need to show him who's in command here. I know, Connell answered in a hushed voice, stepping close to an unattended campfire. Pulling out the letter Farrell had given him for Chaldear, he glanced up at Briok, then slid a finger under the envelope flap and broke the seal. Pulling the letter out, he flipped it open when a smaller folded piece of paper slipped out. He caught it midair. Tilting the larger letter to read it by firelight, he scanned it, then quickly read it aloud to Briok. My Lord Chaldear, the bearer of this note is a man claiming to be the son of King Cameron. The friends he has with him will stubbornly vouch for his claim. I confess that, despite the clever story they've conjured, I cannot bring myself to believe a word of it. All too recently, I had purchased this man as a slave and had him branded. Determining that he demonstrated an unusual level of intelligence, I decided to manumit him and retain his services. Events occurred where he was detained by highwaymen and all lost the use of his abilities. Imagine my surprise and humor when he showed up claiming to be a king's son. He likewise claims that Torian is plotting to overthrow Tir Monarch, and it is his intent to prevent Torian from accomplishing these supposed plans. I would normally assume the rantings of a madman. I would have imprisoned him here, but thought you might enjoy a good diversion. I sent him with an escort of soldiers under the command of Captain Cadfin. Cadfin is not the sharpest blade in the armory, but is obedient to a fault. One additional matter needs to be brought to your attention, and that is the presence of dragon hunters. I was more than surprised to discover the presence of at least half a dozen of these strange individuals. Why they are here, and now truly baffles me. I have questioned several of them, and their response is uniform. The dragons have returned. I have one or two under surveillance, but view them for the present as harmless fools. Still, I thought it might interest you. Your obedient servant, Farrell. Connell glanced up at Briok. Skillfully done. I carry the letter condemning me. What's the other one say? Connell unfolded the small page. The handwriting was tight and neat. My king, in accordance with your wishes, I submit my observations concerning Lord Farrell's letter. The gist of the letter is correct. This individual named Connell is an arrogant huckster, pawning an unbelievable fable. He's even hoodwinked an elf, a dwarf, and a druid with this outlandish tale. He should be dealt with as your wisdom decides. As to the matter with Brody's son Blaine, it is as your highness surmise. How Lord Farrell managed to escape is certainly cause for consideration. One further point, I do not trust the druid. Your humble servant, Arnell. Connell sighed in disgust. And to think that I trusted Farrell. The steward's an ass, so that's to be expected. But I really thought Farrell was on our side. Interesting that Farrell's steward is reporting back to the king, Briok observed. What should I do with these? Burn Farrell's and save the steward's letter. It might prove useful later on. Briok turned to glance back over his shoulder where Cadfin strutted with self-importance, having frog-marched the proprietor back to town with the threat of physical harm should he continue his harangue. We need to jettison ourselves from this excess baggage. I agree. How? It's not like we can sneak away. He's got a security out patrolling the area. Connell tossed Farrell's letter into the fire, watching the paper curl as it burned. We need a diversion, something to keep them occupied enough for us to break away. Movement to the right caught his eye, and Maldwick emerged from the darkness with a man Connell did not recognize. Hey, boss, Riak. Maldwick nonchalantly greeted him. Why don't you meet a new friend of mine? Goes by the name of Lorcan. Thought you might find what he has to say very interesting. Lorcan was a tall, muscular man dressed as a woodsman, bow in hand and a quiver of arrows over his shoulder. He respectfully bowed and glanced around at the surrounding campfires where Cadfan's cohort were peacefully slumbering. My lord, Lorcan said, do not proceed to Rexford. Coauthor is under Torian's control. He has issued orders to find you. Who are you? Connell demanded. Lorcan lowered his voice. I'm a friend of Drewston. He told me to intercept you before you got to Rexford. Connell turned to Maldwick. Do you trust him? I do, boss. And that's good enough for me. Connell shifted his attention to Lorcan. How did you get past the security? Huh, what security? Lorcan sniffed in disdain. I paused. I passed through the cohort soldiers, then challenged. To be fair, once I got to Maldwick's area, I was immediately a challenge. It's not like we could just pack up and leave here without being noticed, Connell pointed out. I believe I can help with that, my lord. Lorcan grinned. If you can assemble your force to the side towards the road, I can create enough disturbance to give you a chance to escape. Head down the road to the next town. I have people there waiting for you. Give me 5 minutes. Yes, my lord. Lorcan dipped his head in respect, then spun around and disappeared into the darkness. Why do I feel like I'm in the open sea in a boat with no rudder? Connell sighed. Inhaling a deep breath, he rubbed his tired eyes. Guess we better wake up a dwarf and an elf. Or he alerted them, boss. Connell smiled. Why does that not surprise me? In less than 5 minutes, Connell and his loyal group had stealthily edged over by the road, separating themselves from Cadfan's cohort, who slumbered fitfully, impervious to anything but the rest. An explosion rocked the night as a blast of fire and light burst from one of the campfires, followed by a voice crying out, "We're being attacked!" Shaken out of their deep sleep, most of Cadfan's escorts scrambled out of their bedrolls, reaching for their swords. Another flash of light, instantly followed by another explosion, erupted on the perimeter opposite Connell. "They're here!" another voice cried out. As Cadfan's soldiers raced across the campsite, Connell and company vanished into the darkness.
All right. That'll do it for this week, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the story so far, and we'll see you next week.